Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. The rest of the week had gone by relatively quietly. Once Izuku got out of the infirmary, Ida filled him in on how the combat training had gone. While his team had won the match, All Might evaluated their performances. Katsuki had gotten the lowest rating for ignoring his partner and recklessly causing way too much damage, and just generally going overboard. Izuku was right there with him. While he and Star mutually split up, losing his communications left him unable to come to his friend's aid when Achiko got a hold of her. He was also reckless. Star was next, not making many mistakes, except for not paying enough attention to her surroundings. But she got bonus points for quick thinking and adaptability, as well as saving Achiko. Achiko got the highest score for being able to restrain a hero, albeit temporarily, and general cooperation. Really, the only thing she did wrong was forgetting to disarm Star and letting her guard down. Izuku had been impressed, but quickly got over it. Star was full of surprises, after all. Izuku scribbled down some abstract thoughts and ideas in his notebook when Star came up behind him and threw her arm around him. He jumped a little. "Oh, hey, Star." The blonde teen grinned at him. "Isn't this exciting? We're going on a field trip." Izuku grinned as well. "Yeah, and I've heard that where we're going is an awesome place for rescue training." Star laughed. "Of course that's all you can think about, Deku. I'm just glad to get out of the classroom for the day. Tell me about it." The two turned around and saw Mina approaching them, a grin on her face. She slung her arm around Star, similar to how Star had swung her arm around Izuku. "Finally get to do something instead of sitting around all day." Izuku smiled. "Well, we need it all in order to become good heroes." Mina sighed. "Yeah, I know. That's the bad part. I just can't sit still, you know?" Izuku laughed. "I know what you mean." Ida's voice sounded out from the bus entrance. "Everyone line up and enter the bus in an orderly fashion." They walked onto the bus, and the blue-hairy teen was disappointed to see that the bus layout was different from what he had previously thought. The class sat down upon order of Aizawa and began to chat as the bus rode to the site of their field trip. Star bounced up and down to the left of Izuku, excitedly chatting to Mina. Izuku was making small talk with Tsu Ajui, a girl with a frog quirk, who insisted that she be called Tsu. "Your quirk is really cool, Tsuyu. So you can basically do anything a frog can do?" The girl nodded. "Basically. If you don't mind me asking, what does your quirk do?" Izuku grinned nervously. "Oh, it's just a basic strength-enhancing quirk. You know." Tsuyu's eyes looked at him, wide and calculating. Izuku sweated nervously, but sighed in relief when Tsuyu nodded. "That's cool too." A scoff could be heard near the front of the bus, and they turned to it. "Please, why would you want to associate with that idiot Deku?" A boy with spiky red hair, Eijiro Kurishima, gave Katsuki a confused look. "That's not very cool, dude. Midoriya here is pretty cool. That stunt you pulled back in combat training was pretty manly." He turned to Izuku at the last sentence. Izuku blushed a little, rubbing his arm that had a burn scar over it. It wasn't very well planned, and it was really dangerous. "I could have seriously hurt Star or Achiko." He frowned a little, and Kirishima grinned widely. "See, this is what I'm talking about. What modest guy." The other students nodded, which only made Izuku more embarrassed, and Katsuki grew more angry. Tsuyu looked at Katsuki, expressionless. "You aren't very cooperative or nice. It won't help you very far in the hero game." Katsuki's veins popped from his forehead, but instead of screaming and trying to kill the frog teen, he spun around in his seat and looked out the window with an angry expression. Mina groaned. "Geez, what's that guy's deal anyway?" Star shrugged. "I've only known him for like 10 months. He's always been like that, as far as I know." Izuku sighed. "Katsuki can be kind of abrasive, but I think he means well." He didn't say a word, but Katsuki grit his teeth when he heard the little twerp try to stick up for him. It really pissed him off. The bus came to a stop, and Aizawa stood up. "We're here." He walked off the bus, and the students followed after. They entered the huge, dome-shaped building, and Izuku's eyes shone as he looked around in awe. "Whoa, this place is huge." Star nodded. This is pretty cool. Then, someone walked up the stairs to meet them at the entrance. Izuku and Star had stars in their eyes. It's 13. He's one of the best rescue heroes to come out of UA. Star just mumbled under her breath. Spaceman. 13 spread his arms wide, gesturing to the entire building. Welcome to the Unforeseen Simulations Joint, or USJ for short. A boy with red and white hair frowned. I feel like that might be foreshadowing. 13 continued. Today you will be in groups of 5, each group taking a station in order to save the people caught up. The people will be training dolls that I have personally placed. There's 10 of them per station, and you must find all 10 before you're allowed to move on to the next zone. The students listened raptly, and Aizawa stepped forward. I will be selecting the teams. A wave of groans sounded out. Teachers picked the worst teammates. The shaggy teacher held up his hand. I don't want to hear it. The class quieted down, and Aizawa began to list off the teams. Team 1. That's Midoriya, Butterfly, Azui, Ishido, and Todoroki. The 5 students gathered together and waited as the rest of the teams were announced. Star grinned. This is going to be so much fun. Mina excitedly agreed, and Tsuyu spoke up. Has anyone noticed that Izuku and Star always seem to be on a team together? The group went silent, and Star shrugged. We're best friends. They all nodded and agreed, turning around once Aizawa was done creating teams. So, each team is assigned to one area of the USJ. In each area, there are mannequins that you have to rescue from various situations. Failure to rescue all the mannequins in the allotted time means that you receive a failing grade for today. On my word, you'll all go to your areas. Ready? Gee. Aizawa was interrupted when the lights in the building flickered and then went out. He frowned, and the students looked around in confusion. The teacher turned to 13 in confusion. What the hell happened out there? 13 shrugged. I don't know. The radio signal is jammed too. A noise sounded out from the middle of the room, and the heroes all turned around, seeing a huge black portal spinning menacingly in the middle of the USJ. Soon, several people began to exit the portal, a man with messy blue hair and hands covering his body, following behind them. He was slouched over, and he had a huge grin on his face. Kirojiri, initiate phase 1 of the plan, and make sure you separate the boy and the girl. The misty form of man floated from inside the portal and over to the blue-haired man. Understood. Remember, Tamura Shigaraki, we're here with a certain goal in mind. Tamura waved his hand in dismissal. Don't worry, Kirojiri, I haven't forgotten. Kirojiri made his way to the front of the building, where 13 was standing in front of the students, while Eraserhead handled the villains below. We can help. 13 shook his head. I can't let you pass. Kirishima groaned. But we can't just. Someone yelled out. 13, on your 6. The rescue hero spun around, and 2 students jumped forward, attacking the misty man that was coming towards him. However, they passed right through him. Kirishima turned around. What the hell? He's not solid. The man opened a portal under him and Bakugo, and the 2 fell through. The class gasped in horror, and 13 popped the cap off of his finger. The mist man began to be sucked up into the suit. Star watched in awe, and Izuka nodded. 13, the rescue hero. Quirk, black hole. He can swallow up and break down any matter and send it to the void. Star mumbled under her breath. That is so cool. Izuka nodded. Yeah, it is. The misty man pulled back and created a portal in front and behind 13, making his quirk activate on himself. He quickly shut off, but the damage had been done. Half of his body was absorbed by his own quirk, and he fell to the ground. The students quickly rushed forward. The misty man intercepted them, however, and opened several portals around them. Izuku, 2, and Star flew into one and watched as they were separate. Kirojiri shut the portals and nodded. Phase 1 complete. Ochako, Kaminari, and Tenya were the only students left with 13. Kaminari went to attack the villain, but Tenya stopped him. Don't go anywhere. We have to get 13 to safety. The blonde opened his mouth, but then closed it and nodded. Okay, yeah. Priorities. Ochako knelt beside the hero. 13. Can you speak? Are you conscious? 13 spoke softly. I'll be okay. You all need to get out of here and get help. Kaminari spoke up. I vote Ida. He's class president, and he's the fastest one of us. The blue-haired boy went to argue, but Ochako beat him. He's right, Ida. You're the only one that has a chance of getting someone in time, so we can save everyone. He nodded. Okay, I'll go then. Don't do anything reckless, though. Just get 13 to safety. The speedster turned and blasted out of the building. Kaminari turned to Ochako. You get him out of here. I'm going to help Mr. Aizawa. He ran towards the battle area before Ochako could argue, and she just sighed. She used her quirk on the incapacitated hero and lifted him up gently. Okay then, let's get you out of here. When Izuku was launched out of the portal, the first thing he noticed was that he was still in the USJ. He sighed in relief. That meant the others were more than likely here as well. The second thing he noticed was that he was rapidly falling towards the water. He braced for impact and hit the water, plunging into it. Izuku opened his eyes, a little bleary from the sting of the water. Luckily, he was a decent swimmer and began to make his way to the top. Before he could, though, he saw a shape making its way towards him, and quick. He began to panic a little, knowing he couldn't outswim the figure, who had the head of a hammerhead shark. Suddenly, something wrapped around his waist and began dragging him out of the water. It pulled him up onto a boat, and he heard someone whistle. Wow, that's a pretty strong tongue you got there. He turned around and saw that it was Star and Two, the frog girl, having wrapped her tongue around him and saving him. He quickly stood up. Thank you, Tsuyu. She blushed a little. Please, just Sue is fine. Ribbit. Star grinned. So, how is the water, Deku? The green-haired boy frowned. Well, other than my now wet socks, we've got trouble. Tsuyu looked over. What kind of trouble? Izuku pointed towards the now several approaching figures in the water. Villains. Star looked over the boat railing as well. Oh, that kind of trouble. They pulled back from the railing, and Izuku tapped his chin. Okay, we're going to need a plan. Tsuyu and Star watched as he began to go on one of his infamous mumble tangents. The frog girl turned to Star. Ribbit, does he do that often? Star nodded. Yup. Tsuyu nodded as well. It's kind of cute. The interdimensional princess froze for a minute before she relaxed. That was a weird reaction. Tsuyu was just pointing out the obvious. Wait, WH. Her musings were cut off when Izuku suddenly yelled. I've got it. They both looked at him, and he began explaining his plan. Okay, look. Star, I need you to make a huge net, like kind of sticky, and I need you to throw it in the middle of the water. So I need you to throw me up, and then grab Star and make a jump for it. Tsuyu gave him an interested look. What's the plan then? Izuku got a determined look on his face. I'm going to do what I do best. Star and Tsuyu gave Rose an eyebrow. Break something in some awesome feat of strength? The green-haired teen faltered a little bit. Not exactly what I was going for, but that's the idea. Let's just do it. The two ladies shrugged, and Tsuyu wrapped her tongue around Izuku's waist. The green teen held a hand up, signaling for her to wait, and then closed it into a fist. Now, Star held her wand up and yelled her spell. Super Sticky Villian Net Supreme. The wand shot out a net, and it landed in the middle of the villains. They all gave an odd look before chuckling. Hey, girlie, you missed. Izuku yelled again. Tsuyu. She threw him into the air and spoke as well. Really? Just call me Tsu. Once he flew up, she grabbed Star and hopped to shore. Izuku positioned himself above the water and facing the direction that Tsu and Star went. His finger coursed with the power of one for all, and he let loose a devastating gust of wind with a single flick. At his angle, he flew backwards, and the water began to violently swirl, capturing the villains in the sticky net as they struggled to escape the whirlpool. Once it cleared, the tied-up villains bobbed to the top, loudly complaining about their situation. Izuku sighed. None of them would drown or anything, and the police can handle them when they arrived. As he flew through the air, he felt something wrap around his foot and looked down to see Tsuyu's tongue. She pulled him down and safely set him down at the water's edge. He stood up and dusted himself off, wincing at his broken finger. He looked over to his two classmates. Star, you two all right? Star grinned and gave him thumbs up. Yup, Fit as a fiddle. So you nodded. I'm fine. Izuku nodded. Good. Now we just have to get back with Mr. Aizawa and the rest of the CL. He stopped talking when an eerie voice sounded out from behind him. Oh ho, what do we have here? He turned around and saw a man with shaggy blue hair standing there. There were gloved hands covering his body, with a large one shrouding his face. He stood unassuming, slumped over, with his hands in his pockets. Izuku wasn't fooled, though. Something about the man was off, and he didn't want to get anywhere near him. Beside him, the misty portal man stood floated. Menacingly, he turned to the blue-haired man. Those are 3 of the UA students I portaled away. Be mindful of what you do here, Shigaraki. All Might is our priority. Shigaraki shrugged. Oh, lighten up, Kirojiri. Maybe I should take out some low-level enemies before the big boss arrives. Izuku froze. Guys, we got to move. He watched as the man, Shigaraki, began to move. Now, he had barely finished the word, and the man was already there, and his hand was encompassing Tsuyu's face. The frog girl watched in horror as he grabbed her face. Nothing happened. The man pulled back. That's weird. He turned around, and all of their gazes fell upon their teacher, being pinned to the ground. His hair was up, and his eyes were red, showing that he had activated his quirk. Izuku looked at the thing that was pinning him down. It really was the best way to describe it. A thing. It had seemingly black feathers and a huge beak with human teeth. Its eyes were small and beady, and its brain was bulging from its skull, fully exposed. The next thing Izuku noticed was that the thing was absolutely huge. If he had to compare it to anything, he'd say that he was almost as bulky as All Might, which was very terrifying. The thing slammed Aizawa's already bleeding head into the concrete, and Izuku didn't hesitate to move. He grabbed Star and Tsuyu's hands and ran in the opposite direction. Shigaraki noticed and frowned. Nomu, can you please not let them get away? Suddenly, the huge thing was in front of them, and they all had to skid to a stop. It went to grab them, but it got held back with a familiar white scarf. The Erasure hero had shakily risen to the ground and was using his carbon fiber scarf to keep the huge thing away from them. Get out of here! They didn't hesitate and began to run in the opposite direction. The misty man from before suddenly appeared in front of them, and Star groaned. Can you guys seriously just go away? She pointed her wand at him, but before she could utter a spell, he was on the ground, and a familiar spiky-haired teen was on top of him. I knew you had a weak spot, you monster. This is the only part of you that's covered, so it must be touchable. The man grunted. Get off of me, child, or I'll have no choice but to. Bakugo let out a warning explosion. I wonder what would happen if I blew this flimsy armor of yours to smithereens. Kirojiri sounded incredulous. You wouldn't. You're bluffing. A stronger explosion rang out. You really want to go and test that? I'll blow you up so bad that they'll be picking up paces of you up from over the entire USJ. Shigaraki chuckled. Well, that's not very heroic. Izuku turned to him. You've been trying to kill us this entire time. The blue-haired man shrugged. Maybe, but you're all supposed to be heroes. How come he can threaten my guy? And it's fine, but if I threaten yours, I'm evil and need to be stopped. They must not be teaching you priorities very well at this esteemed establishment. He kicked a small pebble out of the way and shook his head. You heroes think you can go around and beat up whoever you want, and there will be no consequences. Ugh. And you're much better? They all turned to Aizawa, who was still struggling to keep the reins on the giant monster man. The things you claim, playing the victim. Really, if you wanted to make a change, you'd reflect that in your actions. You're just a child that thinks that the world owes him something. Shigaraki chuckled. Erase your head. You know, I like you. You're very no-nonsense, and you don't really like the spotlight. It'd be a shame to kill you here today. He scratched his neck. But I guess I can while I'm at it. He began to walk over to him, and he saw Aizawa move. He held his hand up and pointed to the monster. Ah, you do that, and my Nomi here might break free and get your students. Can't let that happen, can we? Aizawa grunted, and Shigaraki walked closer. Shigaraki reached him and placed his full hand on the Erasure hero's elbow, and it began to fall apart. Aizawa grunted in pain and Izuku couldn't watch anymore. He coated his legs in one for all's power and launched forward, punching towards Shigaraki. When he made a connection, he didn't feel a thing. He looked at his arm and was shocked to see that it wasn't broken. He looked at what he hit, and it definitely was not Shigaraki. The Nomu stared down at him, completely unaffected by his attack. While this was definitely not a good situation, it gave Mr. Aizawa a perfect opportunity to knock Shigaraki away. Izuku, however, was now at the mercy of the huge Nomu. The bird creature towered over him and was about to land a punch directly on him before something wrapped itself around him. Super long rainbow ribbon. Star yanked back, and Izuku came flying towards her. She caught him and set him on the ground. He turned to her and smiled. "Thanks for the save, Star." She smiled and blushed a little. "No problem." Izuku shifted his attention back to the villains. Shigaraki groaned. "Well, that just wasn't fair. I was distracted." He rose and dusted himself off. "That's no matter. Noma, take care of. Fear not, for I am here." They all turned to the entrance and saw the hulking form of All Might there, loosing up his tie. "And I'm pissed." Shigaraki groaned again. "This really isn't my day. Nomu, get All Might." The big monster thing stepped forward, and All Might jumped down in front of it. "So, you're the one who attacked my students." Shigaraki spoke up from the back. "Well, it was kind of joint effort, but pretty much, yeah." All Might frowned. "What's your intentions?" The blue-haired man began a long spiel about how Hero Society was backwards, and he wanted to kill All Might. All Might winked at Izuku. "This is probably my favorite trick. Get the villain monologuing in time to kick his butt." All Might smashed the Nomu, but it didn't have much effect. All Might nodded. "So it's going to be that way, huh?" Kurojairi tried to speak up. "Tamura, Shigaraki yo." Bakugo let off another explosion. "Shut it, Miss for Brains." Kurojairi mumbled under his breath. "Just because it's true doesn't make it hurt any less." Shigaraki finished strong and held his hands in the air, panting slightly. "Wow, that felt great to get off my chest." Aizawa looked at him from where he was sitting on the ground, sipping a juice pouch. He finished it and slipped it into his pocket. "You got some serious issues. You might want to see a psychiatrist." Shigaraki looked around confused. "Wait, what happened?" All Might laughed, and Shigaraki focused on him. "You were talking just long enough for me to blast your friend right through the roof." All the students stared in awe of All Might's feat of strength. Shigaraki was shaking in anger. No, it wasn't supposed to be this way. Kurojairi, come on. We gotta go. This is game over for now. Grab a boy too." Everyone froze, and All Might echoed what everyone was thinking. "Grab the boy?" A portal opened up under Izuku, and he gasped as he fell through. It shut before anyone could do anything, and Kurojairi and Shigaraki disappeared right after. All Might looked in terror at the spot where his young student had just fallen into a portal to God knows where. A sharp pain shot through his side, and he clutched his wound. That thing got a few good hits in, and he probably shortened his limit. Star collapsed to her knees where Izuku was. "Izuku, so you put a hand on the princess back." "Don't worry, Star. We'll find him." Star shook her head. "I've got to call my mom." She pulled out a pair of scissors and created a portal of her own and stepped through. It closed behind her, and everyone watched in surprise. Bakugo stood up. "What's the deal with all these portals?" "Come on, Frog Eyes. Let's go see what our classmates are doing." He glanced at the steaming form of All Might before roughly grabbing Tsu and making her follow him. Aizawa walked beside towards the man. That was much too close for comfort. All Might spoke low. "I gotta find him, Aizawa. There's no way of knowing what they could be doing to him right now." The black-haired man looked to the spot that his student was previously sitting and sighed. "I know." Once Bakugo and Tsu reached the others, they asked how they were. Bakugo drove them off with "I'm perfectly fine," you rejects. "Don't you dare pity me," while Tsu actually answered their questions. "We're fine, thanks to All Might and Izuku's quick thinking." Ito walked up, his glasses glinting in the sunlight. "Speaking of Midoriya, where is he?" The rest of the class mirrored this sentiment, some more concerned than others. Tsuyu frowned. He was captured by the villains. Star disappeared on her own. Said she had to call her mom. "If I had to guess, she went home." The class was in shock to hear that one of their classmates had been captured. Ida tried to keep everyone in high spirits, and it worked somewhat. The class still had hope that the pros could find Izuku. The villains had escaped, but they'd find them in Izuku. Little did they know that Izuku was nowhere near Tamura, Shigaraki, and his league of villains. Izuku fell to the ground, and the first thing he noticed was that ow. That really hurt. The next thing he noticed was that both of his legs were worthless, probably from when he launched at Shigaraki. Then he noticed he was in a glass cage in a well-lit castle. On the other side of the cage stood a familiar man dressed in a suit and tie, who also happened to have the features of a lizard. Izuku looked in shock. "Hey, I remember you. I accidentally bumped into you on the way home." The man nodded. "Yes, I do recall that. That's actually why you're here, in fact." The green-haired teen gave him a confused look. "What do you mean?" He held a hand up. "Straight to business, I see. Before that, however, allow me to introduce myself. It's only polite." He opened up the cage and held out his hand. Izuku cautiously shook it. "My name is Toffee. Izuku Midoriya." They stopped the handshake, and Toffee bowed. "It's very nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya." He rose and pulled something out from the table behind him. Now, he placed the plate on the table. "Would you like something to eat?" Izuku carefully watched the lizard man carefully as he sat down on the other side of the table, where he had placed the sandwich. They sat in silence for a moment before Toffee nodded towards the plate. "Seriously, try it. I'm sure you're hungry." Izuku eyed the food wearily before picking it up and taking a bite. He chewed tentatively before slowly realizing something. It was probably the best sandwich he had ever tasted in his life. He set it back on the plate. "That was surprisingly good." Toffee nodded. "Well, they're very hard to come by. Anyways, I'm sure you're curious as to why I brought you here." The green-haired teen nodded. "Yeah, am I a hostage? Obviously, you want me alive. Otherwise, you would have killed me long before now. Is this a ploy to get to the heroes? You're obviously affiliated with the League of Villains, and The lizard held up his clawed hand, where he was missing a finger, Izuku noted, and cut the teen off. "Nothing like that. In fact, I was only using that league to get to what I needed. My plans have nothing to do with them. In fact, it's your help that I could use." Izuku rose an eyebrow. "How so?" Toffee leaned back and crossed his legs. "Well, you're a rather forward-thinking young man. The heroic type, the one that wants to help anyone in need, no matter what. Well, where I'm from, that kind of thinking is very rare to come across." The teen frowned. "What do you mean?" The lizard leaned forward and put down a book. Izuku looked at it, and his eyes widened when he saw it. Independence Day. He remembered Star telling him about something like that, but he couldn't recall the exact details. However, he did remember that it basically told the story of Star's family and Thier's settlement in their home of Muni. He looked back up to Toffee. "Isn't this about the history of Muni?" The lizard nodded. "Why, yes it is. I assume you know because of the princess?" Izuku was slightly surprised. "You know Star?" Toffee waved his hand. "Not personally, but I have met her mother." The green-haired teen nodded, and Toffee opened up the book. "Now, the book tells us that the Mumans chased away the evil monsters, and they got their land as a reward. That's the gist, at least." Izuku nodded, looking at the pictures depicting battles between what seemed to be normal people and then an assortment of animal-like creatures. Toffee closed the book. What it doesn't tell us, however, is that it wasn't much of a war at all. In fact, it was more of a massacre. The Mumans chased us out of our homeland and slaughtered countless of our innocents. They paint these monsters they slaughtered as evil, and suddenly it's all okay. Even to this day, we are still heavily discriminated against. We live in excessive poverty, and with the increasing discrimination, food is becoming much harder to come by, as Mumans live on the most fertile lands. The green-haired teen was definitely surprised. He would have never expected that. Suddenly, all the time Star described her exploits of fighting monsters on her homeworld were bathed in a new light, and Izuku felt something at his core. Discriminated against for no other reason than that they were stronger than them? He frowned and clenched his fist. He knew how that felt. He looked up to Toffee. "That's horrible. No one deserves that." Toffee nodded. "I had a feeling you'd feel that way. You see, I've been looking at your home for a while now, and I've noticed something." He looked at Izuku. "You have a lot of the same problems, don't you?" A chill ran down his spine. He didn't say it explicitly, but he felt like suddenly Toffee knew a whole lot more than he let on. He nodded. "Yes, we do in some aspects." Toffee nodded. "I've also noticed the people like you, Mr. Midoriya. People that don't have any personal bias against someone. People that are willing to help anyone and see the good in anyone. It certainly shows in your society of heroes. That's why I specifically sought you out. Not only do you have these qualities, but you are very close with someone very important on Muni." Izuku narrowed his eyes. "What do you want, a star?" The lizard held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Nothing, nothing. I want you to watch her carefully, though, and try to sway her view on monsters. She is very blinded by her history, and I feel like she may change her mind about us, given the chance." Izuku relaxed, but still watched the lizard. "So you just wanted to talk to her?" Toffee nodded, and Izuku sighed. He looked up, a determined look on his face. "I want to be a hero one day, and in order to do that, I have to help anyone that needs helping." He held his hand out. "I'll help you, Mr. Toffee." The lizard smiled and returned the handshake. "I appreciate your compliance greatly. The future hero of monsters, Izuku Midoriya." When Star emerged from her portal, she went directly to her mirror. She rapidly hit some buttons on the side of the mirror and tensely waited for her mother to answer her. After a few seconds, her mother answered, seemingly in the middle of being groomed by some staff. "Was it D or can't you?" She froze when she saw Star's panicked face. "What happened?" The princess spilled about how they had been attacked at the USJ and how Izuku had been captured when the villains had retreated. Star ran a hand through her hair. "I don't even know where to start, so I just called you. It was all I could think of." Queen Moon's expression was soft as she looked at her daughter. "Come to the castle. I think we can find a way to track Izuku. That way we can rescue him." Star looked up and nodded, determined. "Okay, I'll be right there." She turned, opened a portal with her dimensional scissors, and stepped through. Next thing she knew, she was standing in the middle of her mother's bedroom, where said mother was looking through a large book. Star approached her and saw that the book was full of spells. Star raised an eyebrow. "There's a second magical spell book?" Moon peered over her shoulder. "Oh, there are hundreds of them. The one you have is just the most important one." Star nodded. "Ah, okay. So what's this one about?" The Queen of Muni continued to flip through the book. "Well, it's a book your father got me for my birthday one year. At the time, I thought a book of hunting spells was a little bit useless to me, but it can come in handy from time to time. I certainly used it when you were first learning to walk. You'd completely disappear for hours." Star blushed before she noticed a spell. She pointed at it quickly. "How about that one? The scrying GPS spell." Moon looked at the spell. As she read it, she began to nod. I think this very well may work. Star, I need you to grab a scrying bowl out of the kitchen and some water." Star rose an eyebrow. "Why are they in the kitchen?" Moon frowned. "Your father thought they were woks and tried to cook corn out of them. Luckily, they were cast iron, so they are still good to use. They also cook very good corn." Star nodded again. "Ah, okay." She ran out of the room, and Queen Moon began reading the directions of the spell. UA was having a field day as far as paperwork was concerned. The media was holding the school to a flame, not only for having a security breach where several students' lives were in danger, but also losing one Izuku Midoriya to a band of villains. That had definitely been the crowning failure on UA's part, and All Might, or Yagi Tashinori as he's known by some, was feeling that more than anyone. He sat quietly near the window in a coffee shop that was near the school, and he was looking at online articles, bashing UA for what was already dubbed the USJ incident. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. He had failed Izuku as his mentor, and he hadn't heard a thing from Tsukachi. Of course, it had been several hours, but he probably needed more time. About that time, his phone went off, and he hurriedly answered. "Hello." A familiar voice answered him back. "Hey, All Might, can you step outside for a moment?" He recognized the voice of the young Miss Butterfly, and he frowned. "Miss Butterfly, what is it that I need to step outside for?" She was quiet for a second, and then she spoke up. "We found Izuku, and we may need your help." Yagi immediately jumped out of his seat, much to the surprise of the people around him. He blushed in embarrassment for a moment before going outside. On the sidewalk, Star stood there, looking a little nervous, and she was standing beside what looked like some kind of portal. Once she spotted him, she gestured for him to come over. "Come on, we don't have a lot of time." He nodded and stepped through the portal with the blonde princess. When they stepped out, they seemed to be in a huge, elaborate castle. Before him stood a tall, regal-looking woman with tall blue hair. Yagi looked over to Star. "Who is that?" Star looked at him. "Oh, that's my mom, Queen of Muni." The blonde man jumped and bowed quickly. "My apologies." Moon waved him up. "Oh, no need for that, Mr. Might." The hero blushed. "Please, just call me Yagi." The queen nodded. "Very well then, Yagi. I've heard much about you from Star. I must say, I am impressed by your exploits." He blushed again. Man, he hadn't blushed this much since junior prom. The memory itself was enough to send his face red. He shook the though away and looked towards the two. "So, you found young Midoriya?" Star nodded. "Yeah, we used a scrying bowl to find his location." All Might frowned. "Where is he?" The blonde princess looked around a little nervously. "That's the thing. He's directly in the middle of monster territory. The monsters have him hostage and are keeping him there." Yagi frowned deeper. "What's the plan then?" Izuku let go of Toffee's hand, and the lizard was about to say something else, but he was interrupted by a monster coming up behind him and alerting him. "Sir Toffee, there are 3 unidentified Mewmans heading towards the headquarters." Toffee frowned slightly. "Well, I can't say that I am surprised. Izuku, that is most likely Star and her mother. Remember what I told you to tell them." Izuku frowned as Toffee left the container. "What are you going to do?" The lizard man put his coat on and straightened his tie. "Well, I don't think they'll want to take the diplomatic approach to all of this, so I'm going to give them a show." "Izuku, I need you to keep our little deal a secret, please." Izuku frowned. "Wouldn't it be easier to tell them?" Toffee grinned. "I've got a plan." The green-haired teen's frown deepened as he watched the lizard man sit down at a long table and simply watch the front door. It didn't take much longer than a few minutes, and suddenly 3 figures came busting through the front door. Izuku saw Star in the middle and Queen Moon on the left, but then the figure on the right seemed to be a bit more familiar. All Might? The dust cleared, and the hulking mass of a man that All Might withstood at full height. Toffee seemed slightly impressed, and then All Might moved at Mach speed across the room and punched the lizard man in the gut. Meanwhile, Star was trying to break Izuku free from the huge glass casing that he was trapped in. Moon was with All Might, both of which fighting Toffee. Suddenly, Izuku heard the glass shatter, and Star suddenly grabbed him out of it. Strangely, the glass remade itself as Izuku left, seemingly growing a half-inch thicker. When he stood outside of the cage, Star embraced him in a huge hug, and he blushed a bright red. "I was worried about you, Deku." Izuku returned the hug, and by now, both teens were red. "Thank you." They separated, and they saw that All Might had gone back to his skinny form, and Queen Moon had let her hair down. Izuku frowned. Where did Toffee go? All Might frowned. He left, made a huge portal, and closed it behind himself. Izuku nodded, and Queen Moon sheathed her sword. "Well, we got Izuku, so I'd say it was a victory, even if Toffee escapes us today." Star jumped in the air and let out a loud whoop, and they laughed at the blonde's enthusiasm. Izuku smiled, but it fell when he looked back, remembering the deal he had made with Toffee. He had a feeling that it was about to get very complicated. Izuku had felt off the entire time that they had been on Muni. After they rescued him, they went back to Butterfly Castle, and Queen Moon treated them to a huge meal of corn. All Might decided to go early due to the fact that corn would upset his digestive system beyond what was already wrong with it. King River seemed a little disappointed, as he had wanted to talk to the professional hero, but he got over it relatively quickly. Izuku stayed with Star and continuously thanked Queen Moon, who seemed to be a little caught off guard by the excessive gratitude. "No, really, it's quite all right." Izuku had blushed, and Star had nudged him and laughed. Speaking of the blonde princess, she had been especially excited to have him back from Toffee, showing her joy to see the hero in training alive and well with a huge smile on her face, and giving him hugs here and there. Izuku would turn red each time it happened, and return the gesture best he could. However, He couldn't get the conversation that he and Toffee had out of his mind. I want you to watch her carefully, though, and try to sway her view on monsters. He looked up to the matriarch of Muni, a serious expression adopted on his face. Queen Moon, who exactly is Toffee? The light-hearted mood suddenly shifted, and Queen Moon adopted a conflicted look. He's been an enemy of Muni for a very long time. He's responsible for thousands of deaths of innocent Mumans, including my parents before me. Izuku hadn't expected that at all. I'm sorry. She waved her hand in dismissal. No worries. It was a very long time ago. Queen Moon stood from the table and excused herself from the meal, leaving Star and Izuku alone with King River. The short-statured man looked in the direction that his wife departed to and turned around with a sigh. Never mind her, boy. Toffee is the cause of some very unpleasant memories for Moon. I believe I can give you a better answer, though. You see, several years ago, before Moon and I were married, there was a long and bloody war that the Mumans waged with the Septarians, which is the race that Toffee is a part of. He led their armies as their general, and was widely known as the strongest of them, with his healing ability, which all Septarians had to a degree being the fastest that any had ever seen. He was responsible for the death of Moon's parents, which included the former queen. Izuku nodded. When Toffee had spoke of the war between humans and monsters, he must have been referring to a much older battle that he didn't participate in. River wasn't finished with his tale, however. Moon went out into battle one day, after a particularly bad council meeting, and managed to drive Toffee and his monsters away with a spell that permanently severed his middle finger. We haven't heard from him since, so it is strange that he's come from the shadows now. Star grinned. Don't worry, Dad. If we see that guy, we'll show him. He's gonna get it. Izuku chuckled at Star's antics, but went silent when he thought about Toffee's instructions. If he was able to talk to the lizard, man, he would definitely ask him about these things. The blonde princess noticed that Izuku went quiet. She looked down to the boy and gave him a concerned look. Hey, Deku, you okay? Izuku looked up, shaken from his thoughts. He gave a sheepish smile. Oh yeah, I'm fine. I was just thinking about some stuff. Hey, we should probably head out. We do have school tomorrow after all. He gave Star a small smile, and she groaned. Ugh, fine. We always have school. Izuku laughed. Well, it's a weekly thing, so. She said goodbye to her father and opened a portal. Izuku went through first, and Star frowned. Something was bothering him pretty good. He wasn't even mumbling at all. To say that Mrs. Midoriya had been overjoyed to see that her son had come home safe and sound had been an understatement. She practically tackled the boy when he came through the dimensional portal that led directly into their apartment living room. Tears streamed down her face, and Izuku looked like he could barely breathe. Oh, my baby, never do that to me again. Izuku wheezed. Of course, Mom. Can you please let go, please? She suddenly let go and apologized again. Izuku just gave a sheepish smile and rubbed his neck. Star giggled at their family resemblance, and the two retreated to their rooms to prepare for bed. When Izuku walked into his room, he pulled out his phone and noticed that he had a message from an unknown number. He opened the message and read it. Hello, Izuku. I do hope you remember our deal. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. He frowned. It was clearly Toffee. How he got a phone, no less his number, was a mystery to him, but he wasn't concerned with that. He got straight to business. King River told me that you led a siege on Muni and killed thousands of innocents. Care to explain? There was a few seconds of delay, but he got a message relatively quickly. Ah, yes. That. Well, I will take responsibility for those actions, which were very poor choice. I was much younger then and had a much different attitude about it then. My failure there opened my eyes, however. I know I must be much smarter about this than I initially was. Izuku frowned. So it was true. So, you did murder innocents. Toffee responded nearly immediately. Yes, it was a war. The green-haired teen paused. Toffee definitely had a point there. Even his home country had participated in several wars and did some pretty questionable things. That was war, though, and if Izuku could help it, he'd like to focus on saving people than the alternative. He sighed and continued to message Toffee. He did have one more question after all. What about the League of Villains? There were a few seconds, and then his phone buzzed with a new message. I don't work with them anymore. They were just a means to get to you, Mr. Izuku Midoriya. Now, we are in phase 2 of my plan. Izuku admitted that Toffee was definitely a shady character. However, there was something there that truly wanted to help people, and Izuku sensed it. It reminded him of himself, discriminated against because he had no power, while there was nothing he could do about it. He had to keep this under wraps, though, at least until the time was right. Izuku typed back to Toffee. Okay, that's all I need to know for now then. There was a few more things he probably could have asked the Sepatarian, but he was honestly tired, and he did have school the next day. He couldn't be late or fall asleep in class. The mere thought of that caused him to shiver a little bit. Star couldn't care less about those things, though. He lay down on his pillow, his last thoughts before he drifted off being of the blonde interdimensional princess. Similarly, in the other room, Star also went to sleep, pondering on Izuku's strange behavior. When Star rolled out of bed the next morning, she noticed that she had actually managed to get up on time. She got dressed and walked out of her room, noticing that Izuku was sipping coffee with his mother. He grinned towards her. "Good morning, Star. I made you some coffee." At the mention of the delicious bean juice that made her go fast, Star sprinted forward and quickly snatched up the cup, downing the scalding liquid in a few gulps. Mrs. Midoriya gave her a sheepish look. I'll never understand how she can do that. Izuku merely took a sip of his coffee and grinned. Well, she is Star Butterfly. Star winked and stuck her tongue out. The one and only. The green-haired teen chuckled, and Star could smell mint and lavender wafting off of her, meaning that he had already gone for his morning run and taken a shower, getting dressed afterwards. She grinned. Well, I'll never understand how you can get up and go run and then get home and shower, all before I even get out of bed. It's way too early. Mrs. Midoriya laughed. Well, she's got you there, Izuku. Izuku grinned sheepishly. Fair enough. He finished his coffee, and the two of them left the apartment in high spirits, heading towards UA with smiles on their faces. Star noticed that Izuku was behaving much more normally now, so it just chalked up his abnormalities from yesterday to him being shaken after being taken by Toffee. Maybe she should ask later? Izuku thought about his conversation with Toffee the entire way to school, but he didn't make it clear. It wasn't deep thought, just a replay of the conversation over and over, trying to find any falsities in Toffee's demeanor. He was shaken out when Star yelled to Mina Ashido, who was walking towards the entrance of the school at about the same time that they were. She smiled and ran over, and the two girls gave a friendly embrace, like they'd known each other for years. Then Mina turned to him and smiled. And it's good to see you in one piece as well, Midoriya. We had heard on the news that All Might had saved you from the villains, but they didn't go into much detail. Izuku nodded. Yeah, it was pretty scary. She didn't press anymore, and the three of the students walked into UA together. When they all settled down in class, Mr. Aizawa stood at the front of the class. After the USJ incident, we decided to up the ante a bit in our curriculum. That, combined with the upcoming UA Sports Festival, we will begin to go over more complicated and challenging things, starting today with one of the most important parts of being a hero. In fact, we have a guest teacher that will speaking to the class about this. The class clamored quietly, nervous about their training, and Aizawa continued. Today you will be. Hell, everyone. Who's ready to choose their hero names? Choosing hero names. Midnight busted into the room, in full costume, ready to help the students choose hero names. Aizawa just sighed and lowered himself into his sleeping bag. I really need to quit this stupid day job. No one heard him, as they all excitedly discussed their hero names. Midnight quickly gained control of the class, and she explained the day's activities. You will all come up to the front of the class and show me your names on the whiteboard. The students all received whiteboards and began to work on their names. Midnight went around, giving little tips and pointers to everyone. A few already knew their hero names, and Izuku was definitely feeling the pressure with all these really good names. He couldn't just so clearly rip off All Might, but he wasn't sure what he should go with. He heard something and noticed Star leaned over, calling him. Izuku. He looked over. Yeah, what is it, Star? She looked at the blank whiteboard. What should I do for my hero name? He paused. Wait, aren't you going to be Queen of Muni one day? She paused as well. Oh yeah. Suddenly her eyes lit up. I could just do both. Izuku watched her jump out of her desk and sprint up to the front of the classroom. She slammed her white board down and strongly proclaimed her hero name to the class. Queen Star. Everyone jumped at her volume, and Midnight nodded. What inspired that? She grinned. Well, I am an interdimensional princess who will be queen of Muni one day, so I figured I'd just do both. Thanks for the idea, Deku. Izuku blushed, and Midnight shrugged, giving it her seal of approval. Some students went next, and it came down to only a few students. Ida and Todoroki had both just gone with their names, and Kachan had yet to pick a name that was suitable, and it seemed like they would need to put a rain check on him. Izuku was at a loss, and was tempted to just put his own name down before he heard something again. Deku. He turned to Star. Yeah? She grinned. I know you'll pick an awesome name. He smiled warmly at the blonde, and his name became so suddenly obvious. He carefully wrote it out on the whiteboard, and went to the front of the class and flipped it around. Deku. Star smiled, and the rest of the class cheered for the name. Izuku returned Star's smile, both knowing the inspiration. Maybe things would be all right after all. Izuku excitedly chatted with Star as they walked down the stairs of his apartment complex, making their way to UA. It had been a few days since the students had chosen their hero names in class, and things were slowly and surely going back to normal. However, that normalcy would be short-lived with the upcoming UA High Sports Festival, which was said to start about noon today. In fact, this exact event is what Star and Izuku was currently discussing. So, Star began curiously, what exactly is the sports festival? You mentioned it before, but never explained it. Izuku grinned and began to explain the event. It's basically the biggest event of the school year. All the first-year students participate in it, and there's only one winner at the end. Usually there are a couple events to thin the herd, and then they start the most interesting part of the festival. The green-haired teen stopped, and his eyes shone with excitement. The tournament round. Star rose an eyebrow. Tournament? Izuku nodded. Yeah, the students left after the first two events face off for the first-place spot. It's always the most exciting part of the festival, and I can't wait to see it this year. The interdimensional princess seemed to share his excitement, as her eyes glowed similarly, and she excitedly hopped up and down. A whole part dedicated just to fighting? I love to fight. The two laughed excitedly and boarded the train that would take them to their destination. While they were on it, they encountered one Mina Ashido, who grinned and patted the seat next to her when she saw them as well. They walked over and took a seat next to the excited pink girl, who turned to them with a grin. So, are the two of you excited for the festival? Star returned the grin. You bet we are. We've been talking about it all morning. Mina gave a laugh, and Izuku listened quietly as the two conversed. As they talked, however, Izuku's mind began to wander back to Toffee. He hadn't talked to the lizard man in a few days, not since he asked about the recent war that Star's mother had participated in. He glanced at Star, who was nodding in rapt attention as Mina spoke to her. He knew that she fought monsters on Muni, but how much of that was really malicious racism, and not just the love of the fight? Maybe that's why Toffee wanted Izuku to go through Star in the first place. He saw that she had the obvious potential to lead the monsters and Mew-mans together. He gave a small sigh. He had to tell Star about his deal with Toffee. His heartbeat got a little faster, and he sighed again. It would have to wait until after the sports festival. He nodded in determination, but what he hadn't realized in his deep thought is that at the tail end of his thinking, he had begun to mumble and caught the attention of Star for a split second. Once he had stopped, Star rose an eyebrow. Tell me what after the sports festival? She shrugged it off, deciding not to press the green bean any further. She knew that he was always a little nervous, and pushing him definitely wouldn't be good. Besides, he's way too cute to upset. She furrowed her brow. Wait, WH. She couldn't ponder the thought any further, due to the train coming to a stop, signaling that it was time for them to get off. The group arose and walked out the train and encountered Uraraka and Ida. The five began to make small talk as they walked towards the school, and before long Star had completely forgotten what she had been thinking about before. The hallways buzzed with excited energy from the students, who were all conversing about the upcoming sports festival. When the group arrived in Class 1A, they noticed that Aizawa was sitting in a chair with his feet propped up on his desk, while the students that were there were talking freely. Their teacher eyed them when they opened the door and spoke when he saw the look of confusion on all of their faces. There's no point on having any instructional time. Just study or whatever, and in about an hour we'll leave to prepare for the festival. They nodded and all went to their respective seats, continuing to talk to each other. After a few minutes, a knock on the door, and Ida got up to open the door. When it slid open, it could be seen that several students were standing there with looks of apprehension on their faces. At the front stood a boy with a smug grin and blonde hair. "Hey there, 1A. You ready to lose today?" Those words seemed to make their way directly to the resident hothead of 1A, Katsuki Bakugo, who immediately rose to his feet and walked to the door. "What the hell did you just say, huh?" Everyone else seemingly shrunk back away from the door, but the other boys stood there, unfazed. "I said that we're gonna, for lack of better terms, kick your butt today." Bakugo looked at him deathly calm and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. The boy began to sweat, but didn't drop the smug look. "I'll kill you." He dropped him and turned around to walk back in the classroom. As he did, the blonde boy brushed his collar off and grinned smugly. "What? That's it? Empty threats and a scary look? I expected more, honestly." Bakugo immediately spun around, his hands igniting violently as he tried to rush the blonde kid, but was stopped when Kirishima and Kaminari grabbed his arms. They looked pleadingly at Aizawa as he tried to get free, but the teacher simply shrugged and leaned back more in his chair. "Honestly, I don't care if he kicks that kid's butt. He's more of a pain than any of you are. He keeps leaving me letters." They all gave Aizawa and the other kid a strange look, and Bakugo was almost free when another kid pushed the blonde onto the ground. He was wearing a black hood that obscured most of his face. He looked around the class before zeroing in on Star. "Star Butterfly, I look forward to encountering you in the festival." Then, as abruptly as he showed up, he left, leaving everyone perplexed as they wondered what that was about. Star shrugged and went back to talking to Mina, but Izuku's gaze lingered at the door where the hooded kid had been previously standing. His heart began to beat a little bit faster, and he had a strange feeling of anger, or perhaps jealousy? Izuku shook his head and went back to talking with his group, but he just couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off with that guy. People piled into the stadium, excitedly watching as the students of UA milled about, preparing for the sports festival that was set to start in about 15 minutes. Izuku stood in his PE clothes, stretching before they got started. Star stood next to him and twirled her wand excitedly. "So, Izuku, what do you think the first event is?" Izuku shrugged. "I don't know. They do something a little different every year. Last year, they had a big dance-off. Present Mike and Midnight judged. It was actually really cool." Star nodded. "Oh, okay. Suspense, exciting." The green-haired teen chuckled and stood up straight. He looked forward, and Midnight walked upon the stage and grabbed a microphone. "Students, faculty, guests, and viewers at home, welcome. The UA Sports Festival is about to begin. However, before we announce our first events, we'd like to have our top first-year students say a few words." She motioned for Bakugo to come on stage, and the explosion user made his way up. He eyed the mic for a second before looking at the crowd with a bored expression on his face. "When I look out on the crowd of students before me, I see a bunch of losers who are about to get their asses handed to them. I'm talking especially to you, you blonde-haired extra." The blonde kid that had come to the room earlier that morning looked slightly offended by the call-out, before composing himself and regaining his smug grin. Bakugo ended his speech there and walked off the stage. The people in the stadiums looked at each other, slightly confused, while Midnight rushed back to the stage in order to pick up the dropped ball. "Thank you, Mr. Bakugo. Hey, our first event." She got back into the groove and turned back to the students. "This year's sports festival will be a little bit different from usual. All of you will still be competing for the top 100 spots, but instead it will be in a free-for-all obstacle course." The students clamored at this announcement and looked at the screen, which showed clips from the course. Once the clips had all cycled through, Midnight turned back to the students. "Now, you all have about 10 minutes to get to the starting point of the obstacle course, and Present Mike up there in the booth will tell you all when to go." At these words, the students all made their way to the obstacle course, Star hopping alongside Izuku. She turned towards the green-haired boy. "Hey, I have a plan to get to the end. You want in?" Izuku rose an eyebrow before he shook his head. "Nah, I'm gonna do it my own way." Star nodded and shrugged. "I figured I should ask. I didn't think you'd want it anyway." The green-haired teen chuckled. "Yeah, good luck, Star." She grinned back at him. "Good luck yourself, Deku." She got in her own starting position, and Izuku looked forward in determination. A couple of seconds of tense silence went by before Present Mike yelled from the announcer's booth, "Begin." Immediately, the students were in chaos. Star held her wand up and summoned her cloudy charm, and the two zipped away together. Then, Izuku noticed that the floor was quickly being covered in ice, and he hopped up, using a little bit of one for all on his legs. He winced, almost feeling the bruises forming on his ankles. He ignored the pain, however, as he used the ice to slide past the students that had gotten stuck. He heard Present Mike announcing the happenings in an excited voice. And right out the gate, Star Butterfly is gone, and Shoto Todoroki has frozen most of his fellow students in place. But not all of them, and they're hot on his tail. Todoroki looked back and frowned slightly. "Well, I was hoping for more, but that will have to do." He focused forward and began to skate at a faster pace. He heard a voice beside him, as well as the familiar sound of explosions. "Hey, you half and half monster. Come here, let me kick your butt." He resisted the urge to roll his eyes when he noticed Star Butterfly floating above them all on a huge yellow cloud. He watched in disbelief before sighing to himself. "This is all a little weird for me." Izuku ran at an even pace once he had gotten away from the ice, and he was still making good progress, definitely being near the top 20 people if he had to guess. As he ran, he noticed the giant zero-pointer robots from the entrance exam. He blanched and sighed. Well, this is convenient. He didn't want to risk hurting his arm, so instead of attacking any robots, he ran past the destruction that his classmates and other schoolmates were doing. A large piece of metal caught his eye, and he grabbed it, surprised by how lightweight it was for a giant piece of iron. That, or I really have gotten a lot stronger. He slung it over his back, using some wires to tie it around his torso, and kept on running. Present Mike excitedly jumped in his booth, and Aizawa snored lightly, a hat covering his face. "Wow, look at those students go. Eijiro Kurishima and Tetsu are destroying robots like it's nothing. Shoto Todoroki and Katsuka Bakugo are still in the lead, and Star Butterfly has disappeared." He looked on all the screens, but didn't see any sign of the interdimensional princess. "Yeah, I'll have a cheeseburger. Do you take silver coins?" The Burger King drive-thru lady gave the girl on a cloud a confused look before nodding dumbly. Star grinned and handed her a handful before winking. "You can keep the change." She sped off on her cloud, leaving the employee there with a handful of coins and a look of pure confusion. Izuku looked at the huge canyon before him nervously. "How do they even?" He shook his head and steeled himself. "No time, we gotta go." He grappled a rope upside down and started to crawl across, a determined look on his face. Present Mike grinned and pointed to the screen and yelled, waking up Aizawa for a split second, who drearily looked around before leaning back in his chair and mumbling something about forgetting his soundproof headphones. "It looks like Shoto Todoroki has finally reached our final segment, and with Katsuki hot on his heels." Literally. Bakugo grinned savagely as he propelled himself forward, chasing Todoroki as he froze the ground to get over the mines. The Ice Boy growled and mumbled to himself, "I know this is helping the other people, but I can't afford to take it slow." Star ate her hamburger happily and looked down at Cloudy. "Hey, Cloudy, do you even know where the school is?" The cloud metaphorically shrugged. "It's somewhere around here, I'm sure." Star nodded, accepting that response, and went back to eating. Izuku frowned, looking at the people carefully avoiding all the landmines, and suddenly had an idea. "Boy, am I glad that this metal was there for me to pick up. It was really convenient." He began digging up the mines, getting a lot of confused looks from the people that were passing him by. Once he had accumulated a pile that he deemed big enough, he prepared himself on one side of his metal and jumped into the pile. Present Mike was watching Patient Ally, before something huge and loud caught his eyes. He looked forward and, holy wow, Izuku Midoriya just skyrocketed ahead of the entire competition. Aizawa actually jumped this time, and he slapped the back of President Mick's neck. Lower the volume, would you? Izuku flew through the air and was about to land when he forgot that he didn't have much of a landing strategy. He frowned. Oh great. Then he noticed that Todoroki and Bakugo were both right below him, and a plan once again began to formulate. He positioned himself to where his feet landed on his shoulders, and he hefted his sheet into the air. Sorry. He brought the metal down in a mighty blow and used the energy from the blast to propel himself even further forward. He landed on the ground with a running start and began to pump one for all into his legs. He quickly grabbed second gear and was blasting forwards towards the finish line. He passed through the tunnel, and after a few seconds of darkness, he blasted through and heard something he didn't think he'd hear. First place, Izuku Midoriya. He stopped, panting, and poked his legs. He winced at the pain. Definitely bruised, but probably not fractured. He could start to fix him up a little bit. Speaking of, second place, Star Butterfly. He turned around and saw Star hop off of Cloudy and poof him away. She grinned at him and gave him a high five. Good job, Deku. You didn't need my plan after all. He noticed the bag in her hand and gave her a bewildered look. You went and got Burger King? Star nodded. I got bored up there. The green-haired teen chuckled at her antics and watched as Todoroki and Bakugo came in third and fourth respectively. Katsuki growled at his rank. Deku, fish monster, half and half monster. I'll simultaneously kick all of your butts. Of course, nobody heard them, and soon everyone that was moving on had entered the building and turned to Midnight to await further instructions. Midnight watched as the rest of the students began to file into the stadium. Once they were all present, she presented the ranks for the race, showing the top 100 people that would move on to the next round. As people looked at their rankings, she began to present the next event. Attention students. All of the students looked towards the X-rated hero and waited as she continued. The next event will be a cavalry battle. Each of you will split into teams of 4, and you'll be competing for the top 4 spots. Each of you will have a point value based on your rank in the race, going from 5 all the way to 1 million. Izuku froze and looked at the leaderboard, which now had a 1 million posted next to his first place rank. He gulped and could feel the killing intent from everyone around him, all of them greedily mumbling about his 1 million points. Well, everyone except for Star, who was still sipping on her drink. She turned to Izuku and grinned. Hey Deku, you want to be on a team? Izuku thought for a moment before nodding. Yeah, we just have to find 2 more members. Once Midnight said they had 20 minutes to get their teams together, the two began a hunt for more team members. Most people said no, scared of being on the same team as Izuku, due to the 1 million point bounty that was on his head. Star walked up to her second best friend on Earth. Hey Mina, want to be on a team with me and Deku? The pink girl seemingly debated it for a moment before shrugging and grinning. What the heck? With you too. I'm sure it will at least be interesting. Star laughed, and the two walked over to Izuku. Star waved at him, getting his attention. Hey, Mina said she'd join. Izuku grinned. That's great. Now we just have to find one more person. Katsuki growled, dragging Kirishima behind him, as the two looked for the 2 more teammates. The redhead saw Uraraka and turned to Bakugo. Hey, what about Uraraka? The explosion boy looked at her skeptically. Pink cheeks? He thought for a moment before stomping over to her. Gravity Girl. She jumped in surprise and turned around, eyes wide when she saw Katsuki. Oh, Bakugo. Hey. He looked at her, his permanent scowl boring into her soul. She began to sweat, and he finally spoke up. Join my team. Her eyes widened again. Awa. He frowned more. What, don't want to? Think you're better than me? Round face? She waved her hands, blushing a little at the nickname. Oh, definitely not. I'm just surprised you want me on your team is all. Bakugo scoffed. I have a plan, and your quirk could be helpful. She blushed a little and agreed, while Kirishima gazed at the two in bewilderment. He had never seen Katsuki act so calm around someone and even give a compliment, or at least as much of one as you could get from Bakugo. Neither of the other two seemed to notice, and before he could say anything, he was jolted out of his thoughts when someone approached them. "You're Katsuki Bakugo, correct?" They all turned and saw the hooded figure that had come into the classroom and called out Star a few days ago when Class 1B declared war on them. Katsuki immediately glared at him. "And what is it to you?" The hooded figure held up his hands. "I want to be a part of your team. I understand you're planning on going after one Izuku Midoriya, correct?" His voice had a bit of a sinister edge, and Bakugo gave him a skeptical look at the mention of his least favorite one. "Why should I?" The hooded figure held up a hand, and fire began to dance around his hands. "I could be of assistance to you. And I understand you're going after Shoto Todoroki as well. I could easily melt his ice. I have my own personal reasons as well." Katsuki growled. "I'll let you be on my team, but if you cause us this game, I'll kill you." He looked at the hooded figure venomously, but he simply shrugged it off. "I suppose that is fair enough." Katsuki nodded, and they all went to get their headbands that had their point values on them. Izuku, Star, and Mina were still looking for their final teammate, but were not having any luck. Star groaned. "Why doesn't anyone want to be on our team?" Izuku seemed to be a loss. Logically speaking, there should be at least one person left who hasn't been selected to be on a team yet. "There is." Izuku jumped and let out a very unmanly scream. The newcomer gave him a confused look, and the green-haired teen composed himself. He looked over and saw that it was Tokoyami. "Oh, Tokoyami, it's just you. You haven't been selected yet?" The bird boy shook his head. "If you would have me on your team, I'd appreciate it." Izuku nodded and turned to Mina and Star. "I think you'd be a perfect addition. In fact, I've already got a plan." "Time's up." Midnight announced that the time was up, and the students all gathered together in their groups and faced her. "Students, take your positions. Remember, the 4 teams with the highest point values will proceed to the next round." She held her riding crop in the air, and the students readied themselves for the upcoming event, waiting for midnight to sound start. Izuku fidgeted nervously, and Bakugo's hands twitched angrily as he watched Izuku from the other side of the arena. "Begin." As soon as the riding crop came down and made a loud snap, signifying that the event had started, people immediately began to chase each other and steal other teams' headbands. Izuku's team, on the other hand, were very much on the defensive. "Star." The blonde pointed her wand at the oncoming teams and yelled, "Super Cotton Candy Barrier." The team slammed directly into it, the confectionery treat being a lot more stable than they expected. "Oh man, that is so good." A girl munched on the cotton candy, while her teammate groaned. "And it's so sticky." Izuku grinned. "Good work, Mina." She grinned and began to emit a non-corrosive acid. They began to dash across it, using it to escape the other teams much quicker. Izuku lowered down, increasing speed by decreasing drag, and grinned. "The plan is going good so far. We just have to keep this up for another 15 minutes. DKU. The team was halted in their advance due to the sudden intrusion of Katsuki Bakugo, who was grinning ferociously. Izuku frowned. "Tokoyami." The bird guy nodded, and his quirk, Dark Shadow, crept from his back and attacked Bakugo. Growling, said Teen attacked the shadow multiple times. Dark Shadow reeled back from the explosions, and Tokoyami frowned. Dark Shadow doesn't like the light. It makes him weak. Katsuki grinned again. Izuku looked to Star. "Star?" She grinned. "I've got this." The princess aimed her wand towards the explosive teen and yelled, "Mega Narwhal Blast." A stream of large fish with horns came out and slammed into Bakugo, almost sending him careening from his perch atop his teammates. Using this distraction, they turned the other direction and began to run away. Izuku grinned at Star. "Good save, Star." The blonde grinned too. "Don't thank me yet. We still have 12 minutes. Izuku nodded, and they bobbed and weaved through the other teams, while making sure they wouldn't follow them. Bakugo growled. "That fish monster. I hate fish. I hate her. I hate Deku." The other 3 looked at Katsuki sheepishly as he vented angrily. The cloaked kid spoke up. "You know, I know how we can find them." They gave him a confused look. "How?" Katsuki growled out. The cloaked figure positioned himself directly in the middle of them. "All of you hold on. we're going airborne." They looked even more confused, and fire shot out from his shoes, and they all flew directly into the air. Uraraka let out a yelp and grabbed tighter to Katsuki. Before he could say anything, Kirishima spoke up. "Whoa, dude, I didn't know you could do this." You couldn't see his face, but the fire user's smirk could be heard on his voice. "There's a lot that you don't know about me." Katsuki watched the ground, scoffing a little at that statement. He may have a few tricks, but he could never be DKU. His thoughts were caught when he caught eye of Deku and his team. He growled and pointed at them viciously. "Hoodie do get them." The cloaked figure lowered them down, and Katsuki let off a few blasts that just barely missed that Deku. Izuku spun around quickly and groaned at the sight of his childhood rival. "Come on, we just got rid of you like 2 minutes ago." Bakugo didn't even acknowledge what he said as he charged him, ready to blow him out of this world. Wait, that ISN. Before he could reach Izuku, however, a huge wall of ice separated them. Todoroki? The dichromatic boy stared at Izuku with a monotone expression. "I'll be taking those points now." The wall of ice melting down, and Bakugo growling as he and his team emerged through. "Hell no you won't. Half and half monster." Todoroki shifted his attention to the explosive teen. "Yes, I will." Bakugo yelled in anger and continued to spit obscenities at Todoroki. The cloaked figure sighed. "Is this how people see me?" No one acknowledged his words, and Izuku yelled, "Go, Star!" She grabbed her wand and was about to yell a spell, but was cut short when a stream of flames knocked it from her hands and grabbed it. It pulled over to the cloaked figure, who grabbed it and stashed it away. "I'm very sorry, Star Butterfly, but I can't let you do that." She looked at him in shock. "He took my wand." Izuku had honestly not accounted for that, and began to worry just a little bit. Mina, can we get out of here?" The pink teen shook her head. "It doesn't look like it. The only exit seems to be blocked by Bakugo." The said explosive teen's attention had shifted from Todoroki and back to Izuku. Similarly, the ice user had turned back to Izuku in a battle-ready position. The two teams began to charge Izuku and his team, who tried to move out of the way of their attack. However, before they could reach him, vines surrounded the feet of both teams. "I'm sorry to you all, but I'll be taking those points." From the hole in the ice that Team Bakugo created, Ida stepped forward with a girl with green hair, a white-haired boy, and a pink-haired girl with goggles on her head. Mina let out a loud groan. More people. The four teams stared at each other. There was a tense silence, while everyone looked at each other. Then, all hell broke loose. First, Bakugo's team broke free by burning the vines, and went straight for Izuku's team. Team Ida followed them, and then the vines from Todoroki's team bust for being frozen, and they went after Team Izuku. Said team moved away as best they could, but were soon caught up in an all-out brawl between the teams. They threw punches at each other and used quirks, all while trying to stay balanced on top of their teammates. Soon, a hand wrapped around Izuku's point band, but an explosion made them release it. Ice shards flew, fires flared, and vines snaked their way among the 16 students. Soon, they all were split apart and panting heavily. A voice faintly came over the loud speak. 1 minute remaining. The teams all spun towards Izuku, who nervously looked at them. "Tokoyami." The bird boy nodded and enacted a last resort plan by using Dark Shadow to propel them forward, going directly towards Todoroki's team. The other two teams charged soon after, but before they could get to them, he called for Mina to change their direction. On it, they pivoted a full 90 degrees, and the other three teams went to smash into each other. Todoroki called out, however. "Zero." The tape boy shot his arm forward and wrapped his tape around the leg of One Star Butterfly. Team Izuku came to a halt, and Star frantically tried to get the tape off her leg, to no avail. "Now stay still, DKU." Katsuki and his team recovered from the collision first and immediately charged forward and went for Izuku's point bandana. He was blocked by Ida, who tried to grab it before they were both simply encased in ice at the hands and by their feet. Team Todoroki came forward and grabbed the point bandana off his neck. "Thank you very much, Midoriya." His team turned around and began to walk away. Izuku struggled against the ice. Come on, we have to get those points back. 10 seconds remaining. Izuku froze and began to panic before he felt something tap his leg. He looked down, and Star was grinning with her wand in hand. Everyone looked with wide eyes, and Izuku grinned. Star aimed the wand and yelled, "Super Grabby Extendo Arm." A magic arm shot forward and grabbed one of the bandanas by the back and yanked it towards them. Todoroki gasped, and before they could grab it, or Zero could get it with his tape, the buzzer loudly sounded. And that's game. The band reached Izuku, who sighed in relief. Well, it's not the 1 million, but we still get by with 620 points. In second, actually. Izuku then immediately turned to Star and grinned. Good save, Star. You're the reason we're all going to the next round. The other two nodded, and she blushed. Oh well, I've always been great at stealing things. She then turned to the guy that stole her wand and smacked him on the head with it. Ow, what the heck, Starsh? He froze and immediately left. Star gave him a strange look. Something about that pathetic scream of pain sounds familiar. She shrugged and continued to celebrate with the other members of her team. Katsuki growled, once again failing to beat that idiot Deku again. This was ridiculous. He had him. He was almost there. His body began to release steam. He was so angry, and he clenched his fists, which were aching to blow that Deku off the face of the planet. He'd just have to kick his butt in the tournament round. So, this was the end of part 2 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.